Welcome to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always with my co-host, Jacob Acquire. We have another special guest. He's returning from last year. It's Tej Seth, formerly with PFF Consumer Sports, now with Penn Entertainment. This is one of the more talented analysts under 25 if you were to build a data science team. So, Tej, anything else to add to the introduction?
I appreciate the kind words there. I think maybe a little bit of an exaggeration on your part, Stephen. But yeah, thanks for having me back on. I think last time I was on was before the Lions Panthers game last year, which was a very fond memory for me during the season. I know it was a little bit tougher for you guys, but I'm really rooting for the Panthers this year now with our friend Eric Eager working there, and so excited to see what ends up happening with them this season.
Should be a blast. The addition of Brant Tillis and Eric Eager is a breath of fresh air for a front office that I don't know if has made the most analytically sound moves over the past couple seasons. So hopefully with that, there's a little bit more credence with some of the bigger moves that the team makes. We're obviously going to break down the NFC North. And like you alluded to, we had you on the last time when the Lions played the Panthers last year. And the Lions, sure enough, they win the NFC North. The roar has officially been restored. And so I think we got to kick it off and see, are the Lions in prime position to make a Super Bowl run this year? I know at the end of last year, said it's really hard to get to kind of some of these positions. Have they done enough this offseason to put themselves in a position to where they are contending yet again?
Yeah, so you look at the Lions right now, and obviously coming off a very strong season where they're 30 minutes away from making the Super Bowl, in that game against San Francisco. And I think that this season was really for the Lions to kind of clean up some of the areas that they felt like maybe didn't put them into that game last year. And the number one was the outside cornerback positions. They somehow made the NFC Championship game last year with Cam Sutton and Kindle Vildor as their two outside starting corners. Weren't getting good play from either of them. So they put a lot of resources to revamping that secondary this year, drafting Terrion Arnold and Ennis Rakestraw in the first and second round, trading for Carlton Davis from Tampa Bay, and signing Robertson from the Raiders. And I think that when you throw a ton of darts at the cornerback position, you just hope that 2 out of those 4 can stick and really give you better outside corner play than you had last year. And I think that is something that should be able to benefit them this year if they're able to get 2 of those to stick, which is a significant if, but definitely in the range of outcomes. I think on the offensive side of the ball, we'll either see a similar production to what the Lions had last year, but probably a little bit lower just because you're changing one of your guard positions. You're going from Jonah Jackson to Kevin Zeitler, and then you're losing Josh Reynolds as your wide receiver too, and you're having some projection on if Jameson Williams can fill that role.
I think that's a great summation. I know Jacob does a lot of draft stuff, and he was really high on Terrion Arnold. This was his cornerback one in this class. Felt like he was probably one of the more physical corners coming out of this class. And I'm probably taking all of Jacob's kind of talking points, but I'll let him kind of break down what he was seeing on the film and what's kind of being displayed.
Yeah, for sure. I think you bring up a lot of good points, Tage, how the corner room was definitely the weak point on the team, right? I think Terrion Arnold, if he hits, he should be able to. He has all the physical tools. He really turned up in his last year at Alabama. Obviously, Saban's last year made quite the leap after getting a real defensive coordinator in Kevin Steele from Miami as opposed to Pete Golding, who is just horrible. He was the guy who had Will Anderson lining up at 4-eye versus Tennessee. Just a lot of weird stuff from him. But I think Arnold can really come in and hopefully fight for that starting job. On our lads, it says he's one of the outside corner starters, which I think he should be, right? Carlton Davis, after the trade, might lock down one of those spots. And I think Amik Robertson's a sneaky pickup as well. But other than the corner spot, I think the 2 safeties they have, Kirby Joseph, Brian Branch, both of those guys are really good. Branch had a really, really good rookie year. Was in contention, I think, for defensive rookie of the year early on. Obviously, Anderson and Carter made big campaigns down the stretch there. But for me, what's intriguing is keeping Ben Johnson, right? That's got to be the best addition, I guess, or retention, because this is a guy that's been highly coveted the past 2 head coaching cycles, decides to come back again after maybe they thought he would join up with his buddy in Washington, the new GM there. Maybe people thought that David Tepper would throw him a bag, but after all of his interviews, he withdrew again, and he's going to be able to take that offense to another level. I think what's something that's underrated in the NFL is continuity among the play callers on both sides of the ball, and him coming back, I think, is going to be huge. My only hesitation with the offense is, like you talked about, Josh Reynolds was sneakily underrated for them. I think he was used a lot more than when he was with the Rams before, I believe. He was kind of a jack of all trades as opposed to just like a go route guy, which is what he used to be. So hopefully Khalif Raymond, can step up. Hopefully JMO can finally live up to his first round pedigree. We got glimpses of it in that game against the 49ers in the playoffs where he had that nice end around that went for 49 yards or something for a touchdown. Hopefully he can be more than a gadget guy, like more of a full receiver, and live up to that. I think he was the 12th overall pick a couple years ago. Other than that, I'm really, really excited for the Lions. And like you said, how you were rooting for the Panthers, I'm rooting for you guys to win the division this year.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. I think these the big cat teams probably got to stick together while we root for each other. But I agree with so much of what you said there. I think that, yeah, I mean, Ben Johnson coming back is so big because when you have a top offensive coordinator or play caller in the league, you almost always lose them to being a head coach. That's just kind of the direction that the league has gone. And the Lions are in this very unique situation where they get to continue to keep bringing Ben Johnson back. And he is someone that I do believe is a top 5, top 10 play caller in the league. I know, Steven, you have your play caller rankings, and I usually like to see where he ends up falling in those. And I think that he does so many things right with the play action usage, the motion usage, differing his personnel groupings, really using his weapons and getting them open with St. Brown out of the slot and using someone like Sam Laporta both in line and out wide, and the same with Jahmyr Gibbs and kind of moving him around. Like I think there's so many things to like about the uniqueness of his offense and his creativity.
Yeah, no, and I think it all starts up front. I think the Lions incorporate a lot of what they can do based on kind of meshing those run pass looks. And when you have a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs that you just drafted last year coming out of the backfield, you have receiving options in Sam Laporta and Amon-Ra. And like you've both alluded to, if Jameson Williams can kind of take that next step, all of a sudden you have so many different weapons. It forces the defense into a bind. And at that point, it just allows Jared Goff to just sit back there and go through his reads and find the open guy. And at this point in his career, Goff, I think we know who he is. There's that kind of Kirk Cousins tier, so to speak, of quarterbacks, and kind of fits right in. I think he's to the NFL. A contract extension this year that put him really in kind of, I want to say, the top 5 APY in terms of the quarterback position at about $53 million. And my question to you, kind of Tej and Jacob, was he worth that? Was that the direction the Lions should have gone? And is he good enough to elevate this team to the Super Bowl?
You can take it. You're the Lions fan here.
Yeah, so I think the Jared Goff extension by the Lions is really interesting because of kind of the situation that they've put themselves in. They were left with a couple like minus EV decisions to make at quarterback. When you take someone like Hendon Hooker last year, where you take him in the 3rd or 4th round, he isn't able to play in the preseason or at all during the season last year because he tore his ACL very late into his final season at Tennessee. Like, you had no leverage in the negotiation with Jared Goff about, like, we could move on to this quarterback, if you come down on your value with us. So I think like that was kind of like a corner that the Lions had painting themselves into. And then like the other thing is like they were not in the position to trade up and get one of the top quarterbacks in this class, because it would have been so much draft capital to move up from where they were at 29 to try to get into the top 12. And so when you looked at those two decisions, it really came down to extending Goff, knowing that you have a team that can be a top 6 team in the NFL for the next 1 to 2 years, and making sure that you have a quarterback that can lead a really good supporting cast and try to take you to the Super Bowl. And so, whether or not I think Goff will generate positive surplus value on this deal or not is another question. But I think like the Lions kind of had to do this because there was not much of an alternative at quarterback, especially with the position their roster was in.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is more born out of necessity rather than, hey, Goff is worth $53 million. Let's give it to him, even though that's how the QB market seems to be going nowadays. I think Goff is somebody that can get them to the big game. I mean, I can't remember who the player is, if he holds on to that interception that doesn't bounce into Ayuk's hands 50 yards down the field and he runs it in, we could be talking about the Lions as the Super Bowl champs, or very well like being in the Super Bowl and giving the Chiefs a good run there. Hey, they beat them. What was it? The opener, season opener. They beat them, right? So it would have been a competitive game. But I think the extension of Goff, along with the extensions of Taylor Decker, who was like 2 days ago, right? He just got extended. Penei Sewell was extended earlier this offseason. Amon-Ra St. Brown was extended. I think they know what they have on offense, and as long as Ben Johnson is there calling the plays, they like what they have, and they think that it can continue to be a really, really good offense. And I don't see any reason to disagree with that. So as far as, hey, maybe we make a run at this thing and Goff's the guy to do it. He's gotten a team to a Super Bowl before in his previous stop. Maybe it might be worth it if they're able to get to the Super Bowl. We're talking about a team that I think the success last year kind of skewed it. And cover your ears for a second, Tej. The Lions were not a very successful postseason team like forever. And all the credit to, or for a long time, all the credit to head coach Dan Campbell and Ben Johnson. But Jared Goff was also the guy leading the offense out there and helped get him there. So I think he was due for a reward. It's just, I'm not sure if, like you said, it's going to generate a lot of surplus value. But again, this is the day and age of what quarterbacks are making. Jason Fitzgerald on his podcast, the Over the Cap podcast, made a really good point. Nowadays, it's the 50-plus QBs, like a really thin middle tier where like what Geno is getting paid and stuff like that, and then rookie deals. So if you want to extend your QB, you're going to have to give him big money nowadays.
And a lot of it comes down to the years on the contract, what's fully guaranteed, some of those kind of structures. And that's what makes it very interesting when looking at another quarterback that just got extended in the division, and Jordan Love. And talking about Jason Fitzgerald last offseason, he made some interesting points about the negotiation that Jordan Love had on his contract. And it was pretty much that Jordan Love was not betting on himself, that he was kind of getting underpaid. And then he goes from being borderline underpaid to probably overpaid at this rate. And that's kind of where he's at with that 55 million APY. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with getting paid with the top tier. Because when you look at some of the deals from the past couple of years, Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, if you account for inflated APY, those deals are more valuable, and those guys are going to be up for contract extensions and get paid more than Love is right now. But Gutekunst understanding like, hey, we have a time frame we're working on. We have a lot of rookie contracts, especially on the offensive side. We have the flexibility to extend them now. We think he's the future, even though we have a half-year sample size of actual NFL games. Let's take this gamble and bet. I mean, they were right there at the end with the 49ers, so this is definitely a competitive team. The question is, just like with Jared Goff, is this a guy that's going to get you to that next stage? Because it seems like over the past decade or so, it's you have Patrick Mahomes or Tom Brady as your quarterback, or you have a quarterback on a rookie contract. Like that's kind of your doorway to getting to the Super Bowl almost.
Yeah, and I think you laid that all out really well there, where you look at Jordan Love and especially the decision that the Packers had last year with him when they chose to give him that extension that was a little bit different than like having the fifth year option available, where they really bet on the asymmetrical outcome of Jordan Love, where if he is unplayable, like if he's just a backup quarterback level type player, that's worth like 6 to 7 million. You're guaranteeing him like 13 million. So you're losing a little bit of surplus value there. But if he is a starting level quarterback and a good one, like a top 10 quarterback, that's worth like 45, $50 million as we've seen from these past contracts. And so the second half of the season, they ended up getting that version of him and generated a lot of value off of that. And so that brings us to this deal here, where again, there's asymmetrical outcomes, but this time it's in the other direction, where they have Jordan Love. And because of the way he played, especially down the stretch last season, there's a very high chance that he'll be a legit starting quarterback for the next couple of years. But there still is that left tail outcome of the small sample size that we saw last year and him regressing more to what we saw in the first half of the season. And then you're dealing with a quarterback who is not in the top 15, top 20 among quarterbacks. And so that's what makes this deal really interesting is the Packers don't have much of an out if that doomsday scenario ends up happening. I think that there might have been some stuff they could have done with, maybe calling his bluff on holding out and kind of, using the franchise tag next year if they had to, or like ways to get around that. I get why they wanted to get him back at practice and really take advantage of the young roster that they have right now as they continue to develop all of those players. But I think it's going to be really fascinating to see what ends up happening with Jordan Love, with kind of his range of outcomes being so wide right now, and the Packers being tied to him for the next couple of years because of his cap.
Yeah, I think if he could continue what he did in the second half of last year, because let's not sugarcoat it, he was really good in the 2nd half. I think it's going to be well worth it, right? The QB contract, well, every contract, but every QB contract, like the next one, is always going to go up by the time his contract runs out. If he's an effective starter, this is going to be on the low end of the high deals, So if he continues to improve, or if he plays at that level, it'll be worth it. It's just the small sample size to me is just insane. This was like a 9-ish game sample of him being like a top 10 quarterback for him to get this kind of value. And I know that the Packers weren't in a great position, kind of similar to the Lions, where this isn't a typical rookie extension, right? They gave him the 2-year last offseason, so they only had him under contract one more year. Like you talked about, they could have gone the tag route, but if they really believe that they have something in this guy, they might as well go for it. And one thing that I'm kind of concerned about is this was essentially his rookie season. It was his 4th season in the league, right? But this was essentially his rookie season. And I wonder if we're going to get the kind of effect that teams might have tape on this guy now, so he might regress a little bit. They kind of know LaFleur's tendencies with him. They didn't really particularly add to the weapons that the Packers have. If our lads is correct here, their draft pick Jordan Morgan in the first round is an offensive lineman, which I think is a position of need. I think he's going to play really well for them there. But other than rookies and Xavier McKinney, who was their big free agent signing, rather, they didn't add a ton to the offense to help insulate Jordan Love, or not insulate, but give him more to work with per se. So I'm kind of concerned from that front. But if he continues to grow, if LaFleur can bring the thing he brought out of him this past season going forward, it should be a really, really good contract. It's just, to me, I think that, and we kind of glossed over like the high and low outcomes for the Lions. I don't think that this team has enough across the board to match up with the Lions, at least this year. Maybe going forward, Love might take that step. Some of the young receivers might take that step. Maybe the new defensive coach from Boston College, Jeff Hafley, can get the defense back on track. But I think this year, I think we're going to see the Packers playing second fiddle to the Lions, who I think we all mentioned it can really make that Super Bowl run.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at it from like a tier perspective, or even how the market views it, the Packers are definitely a little bit below the Lions. What I do like, and I know you said they didn't really add to the weapon room. They add Josh Jacobs, they lose Aaron Jones. That's kind of a wash. You add that upgrade with Jordan Morgan on the offensive line. It's looking like he's slated to be a guard this year from some of the early training camp reports. But this is a team returning Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, and that's not even including Tucker Kraft, and I'm blanking out on the tight end that was wide open in that Cowboys game. I think it was Luke Musgrave.
Luke Musgrave, yeah.
And so that is a talented enough skill position set to where you don't know where the ball is going to go. And those guys are going to get open. They're going to make plays with the ball in their hands. And we were seeing that at the end of last year during that 8-game stretch when Jordan Love was setting kind of the NFL on fire. I think the one thing that's underrated about Jordan Love's game is his sack avoidance. I think he doesn't take a lot of negative plays, and that's what keeps this offense on the field. It keeps the ball moving. And then I think the biggest question of whether or not the Packers are able to take that next step is, can their defense perform? And they've added so much talent through the first round on that defense. They need to kind of step up and kind of take control. You have Kenny Clark, who you just extended, Rashawn Gary, who you extended a couple off seasons ago. You drafted Lucas Van Ness. And I'm blanking out on the defensive tackle they got out of Georgia a couple years ago. But
Devontae Wyatt.
There we go. I wanted to say Wicks again, but I was like, that's their wide receiver. And that's where it's just, you have those hog mollies up front. You have some guys on the back end, and it's really just what they did through the draft was, hey, can we get a little bit more solid at the linebacker, secondary position, offensive line, and see if what we already have on paper can take a step and translate to a postseason run. And I think they can, because I'm a big believer in Matt LaFleur. I don't know where you kind of see the ceiling of this team, Tej, but I'm really excited.
Yeah, I mean, I think you again laid that out really nicely, and I'm with you on LaFleur. Like, I thought that the Packers were probably being underrated last year because of Jacob, like you brought up the point of stability at play callers, and like that was like the big thing for the Packers is like LaFleur was able to do it with two different versions of Aaron Rodgers and to have success with that, and like you should have a high prior on him with Jordan Love because of the sustained success, and I think like that is always going to give the Packers a big advantage. I think that they're a really interesting team in, the regular season versus the postseason, because when you look at like the kind of the correlation between, where your pass catchers slot in terms of like, number one option, number two option, and like the correlation between, how well your offense performs, like the number one and number two options are really, really important during the regular season. Like that's very intuitive. And the number three option becomes, strongly correlated to your success in the playoffs, because teams are having these hyper specific game plans, and you really need to have those three pass catching options to kind of have success on offense. And I think that's where the Packers benefit the most. Like you guys mentioned, like just how many weapons they have. And we saw that in the Dallas playoff game last year, where Dallas just wasn't able to cover any of those guys. And so, I think that if they are a team that can get into the playoffs, they can be very, very dangerous, and they're going to need their defense to step up, and, some of the offensive players to continue to progress linearly. But again, if that all happens, I think like in the playoffs, they're very dangerous. The floor is probably lower than what the Lions is. Even if the ceiling is about the same, just because of the youth and how success isn't always linear.
Yeah, you talk about the playoffs in that Cowboys game. That Luke Musgrave touchdown catch, I think, was the most open catch of the year. Like the nearest guy was 15 or 20 yards. It was something insane. I don't want to discount any of the young talent they have, and I think it's impressive how all the receivers, or most of them rather, and the tight ends were all rookies or second year players last year. And for them to have that rapport with Jordan Love, I think is going to be really, really deadly. I agree with you. I think that this team has the stuff necessary to make a deep postseason run. Like you were talking about, Steve, they were a few plays away from beating the 49ers. So we might have had a Lions Packers NFC Championship last season. It didn't come to pass that way, but they certainly have the talent necessary. Again, my question is can they get back the level of talent they have on defense with the first round picks like you're talking about? I'm just looking at our lads, and they have like 6 or 7 just pure first rounders on defense, which is pretty insane. If Jeff Hafley can get that out of them, I think that raises their floor a lot and makes them a really, really deadly team. But I don't know. I just can't get past the Lions being first in the division right now. But I agree with you that similar ceiling and probably a bit lower floor for me.
I think that's kind of right where it's at. Those are the top two teams in this division. I think they're definitely both going to be in the playoffs, barring a major injury or two on both sides of the ball. And that kind of gets into the next two teams where it's like almost a step down. And we talked about how Jared Goff got extended and then Jordan Love got extended. Well, Kirk Cousins also got extended. It just wasn't with the Vikings. And so the Vikings went a completely different route. They extended their superstar wide receiver, Justin Jefferson, and they looked for a answer at the quarterback position in free agency, but really for the future in the draft. And so the former Michigan alum, how do you feel about J.J. McCarthy in Minnesota? Do you think he's going to need to sit a little bit to acclimate to the NFL speed in order to take that step and be an NFL franchise quarterback?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And I think this is like it's a very tough thing to kind of figure out, because the Viking supporting cast is ready to support a rookie quarterback. I think that they have the offensive tackles in place. The pass catching group is in place. And even if Kevin O'Connell isn't in like the top tier of play callers, he still probably gives you an advantage, from that perspective. But I also think that JJ McCarthy is someone who was, whose throwing motion wasn't always consistent throughout college. Is wasn't asked to do a lot in college. Like he had a very low usage rate relative to some of the other quarterbacks in his draft class. And I think that he is unique in a sense where he could be someone that takes time to get acclimated to the NFL, the speed of NFL defenses, what it's like to have a 35-40 drop back game if it's needed. If the game script goes that way, like I think that there's going to be stuff, involved in the NFL that he wasn't asked to do that often at Michigan. So if I was the coaches on the Vikings, like I would be leaning towards starting Sam Darnold week 1, just because I would want to see, kind of how he is able to handle the offense, and for JJ McCarthy to really just learn behind someone who had a rough experience starting as a rookie. And I think that there is a lot to be learned from that.
Yeah, I think former Panther Sam Darnold is going to see the field quite a bit there. I like everything that you said, Steve. You mentioned they extended Jefferson. I believe they also extended Christian Darrisaw, right? Their left tackle.
Their left tackle.
So they've locked up both of the two premium young positions that they've drafted over the years here. I agree. I think McCarthy, I don't want to say insulated is the right word, but there wasn't a ton on his plate at Michigan en route to their national championship run. They were a very, very run-heavy team. I think back to the Penn State game where I think it was 9 dropbacks for McCarthy that game, but they got the win there. And I think all the pieces they have on offense, including the addition, you could call it a bit of a traitorous act, I guess, of Aaron Jones being their new starting running back. I think they have everything in place to let him come along slowly. TJ Hawkinson, I guess, is on the PUP to start the year, but I think everything else is really, really good. I think it's also going to be interesting for Darnold, right? This is a guy that seems to bounce around a bit resilient in terms of NFL lifespan there. I want to see what he's able to do, because he didn't have a great situation with the Jets, right? Really bad spot. The Panthers, when he started there, Matt Rule was the head coach, obviously bad spot. And then he gained a little bit of steam when Steve Wilkes took over. And then last year, he's living the life, right, of the backup QB in San Francisco, where everything's like in place for a QB. So I want to see if I say that, like, if he has anything left in the tank, but I do think he'll be the starter. I think McCarthy will be one of a few QBs, rookie QBs rather, that isn't going to start week 1. I think the Patriots situation isn't ideal either, but I'm kind of interested in the defensive side of the ball, because we know what they have on offense. We know what Kevin O'Connell is able to get out of the offense, but the defense is interesting. They probably lose their best defensive player maybe, and Daniil Hunter to the Texans. They kind of swap with them and get Jonathan Grenard there. It's going to be another ragtag group there on the defense this season for Brian Flores, right, is the defensive coordinator. So I'm interested to see what happens there. Ivan Pace had a really good rookie year. I think he's a bit under talked about in terms of rookies. I want to see what they have in Andrew Van Ginkel too. That's one of Steve's guys as a rotational edge rusher there. But it should be really, really interesting, given that there aren't a ton of names on this defense other than Dallas Turner, obviously their first round draft pick. But it should be super, super interesting.
Yeah, I like the direction the Vikings took. They're trying to, and the NFL is a copycat league. We saw the Texans have a lot of success in getting their quarterback 1, edge rusher 1 in the first round last year. And that was huge. That propelled them from picking 2nd overall to a divisional round kind of berth. And that was exciting for that team. And that's what allowed them to kind of take the initiative and go, okay, we're going to reload and kind of add as many weapons as we can to kind of make a Super Bowl run now. So the Vikings get their quarterback 1 in JJ McCarthy, get their edge rusher in Dallas Turner. And for me, when I'm looking at kind of that build, like you talked about, they add Andrew Van Ginkel, Jonathan Grenard. They have a lot more depth on that defense now than they did last year. And while losing Daniil Hunter is going to hurt, while losing Kirk Cousins is going to hurt, have the infrastructure to really be a contender moving forward. And that's what I love about what Kwese's done kind of during his time in Minnesota. He's allowed things to play out. He's done things in a smart way from a cap standpoint. And I think we saw Brian Gutekunst kind of do this not too long ago with the Packers, with kind of shipping out Devontae Adams, shipping out Aaron Rodgers. And when you're able to kind of just, okay, we got to go through 1 or 2 lean years and then we're back in contention. That's where I feel like the Vikings are. So when we talk about ceiling floor, I think there's a lot of variables with kind of the quarterback position. Will it be Darnold for most of the year? Will McCarthy kind of step in sooner rather than later? But I think overall, when you look at Kevin O'Connell, Brian Flores, what they're building right now in Minnesota, this isn't so much a team that's going to make the playoffs this year. I think they'll be in that wild card hunt, but I would see them kind of winning anywhere from like 6 to like 8 games, really, is kind of the range I'm seeing in terms of outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could definitely see that. I do think that this probably has to be the retooling year for the Vikings, like you mentioned, where they kind of just have to take their medicine this year and really make sure that they have a good team for 2025, especially with all the cap that they have going into next offseason, like you brought up. And I do think that this is, a defense that, like you mentioned, Jacob, like not as much talent on it as probably like the average or above average NFL defense, but Flores, because of what he's able to do from a blitzing perspective, might be able to get it to average or above average production, where you have Andrew Van Ginkel, who I think is like such a perfect fit for the system. You bring in Jonathan Grenard, who's younger and could still even develop as a pass rusher and really take it to the next level. And then you have someone like Josh Metellus, who was used a lot last year on blitzes, and they're going to rush 6 a lot, and they're going to be a very unique defense to prepare for week to week. And I think that gives them an advantage in a lot of cases. So I'm excited to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I agree with both of you guys. I saw a stat in this offseason. It's not really a stat; it's just more of a noted thing. There are only 5 teams over the past 5 years that have won 7 or more games. It was the Chiefs, the Steelers, the Saints. I forget the 4th team. It might have been the Niners and or the Bills rather, and then the Vikings were the 5th team. They've been a mark of consistency when we don't really think about them in that way. So I can't really see this team as being like a bottom feeder. I think they will be competitive, especially with what they have on offense. I'm just not really ready to have them above any of the other teams in the division. Obviously, the first 2 teams, like we talked about, deep playoff run / Super Bowl aspirations. And then the team we'll talk about next, I think I like the pieces they've installed. And I think the expectations for the Chicago Bears are so high that I think it's kind of a failure if they don't get at least 3rd in the division this season. So to me, I think the Vikings will bring up the rear of the division, but this isn't going to be like a Panthers situation where they are 2-15 or another team that might win 4 games. I think they will win in that 6 to 8, 9 range, maybe even 10 games, because I think Kevin O'Connell can surprise and Brian Flores does a lot with the defense. But for me, I think they are going to bring up the rear of the division this season, but they should be back to competing sooner rather than later. I think they've done this the right way.
Really, I think when it comes down to it, we saw what Kevin O'Connell did with Josh Dobbs last year. They made it work. They were a competitive team, and they're going to be a competitive team regardless of who's at quarterback. Obviously, like we said, there's just kind of that like rebuilding, retooling process, and you can't bank on that necessarily hitting. You're absolutely right, Jacob. They could definitely win 10 games. They could surprise. They could be one of the wild card teams in the NFC. But I don't see them winning the division here. I think there's just star power on the Lions, the Packers, and even the next team I think we're going to talk about in the Chicago Bears. And I mean, they absolutely murdered the Panthers when it comes to like that trade for Bryce Young a couple years ago. They pretty much get our 9th pick a couple years back in 2023. They turned Jalen Carter into Darnell Wright, who is a very, very good right tackle. And then they get Caleb Williams this year, and then throw that on, they have DJ Moore. And it's incredible to see kind of what they've been able to turn that trade into. Cade Massey has a famous quote that the first pick is only as valuable as it is before you exercise it, you use it. So in this case, we saw the Titans mortgage the Rams, the 1st round pick in 2016. We see the Bears do it again in 2023. Both teams recoup a lot of value. And I think when we talk about the Bears and their floor and ceiling, it is largely dependent on what they got from this trade. And Caleb Williams at a USC, I think he's going to be really, really good. This is kind of already alluding to a perfect take, but I think he's going to be offensive rookie of the year because it's not just DJ Moore he has on that offense. They trade for Keenan Allen from the Chargers. They draft with their first round pick. And this guy's a stud, Roma Dunze out of Washington. So it seems like they have weapons all over the place. You're already talking about the importance of tertiary weapons going into the playoff stage. And I feel like if they put it together with Shane Waldron coming from Seattle, this could be a really, really scary offense and could almost look like the Packers last year, where it takes you a few games to kind of get into rhythm and then you just hit the ground running.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely. Like, I think that when you look at Caleb Williams as a prospect, and you have the highlights up here, and just kind of can see what he can do out of structure, it's going to be a huge benefit for these receivers, because these receivers all pair well together, and they all can kind of access different areas of the field for Caleb Williams, where you have someone in DJ Moore that can really work well underneath. You have Keenan Allen who can work in the intermediate area of the field, and then Roma Dunze who can work deep. And I think that when Caleb Williams moves around the pocket and buys himself time, he should be able to hit all of those receivers at different depths, and I think that should be really exciting for Bears fans.
Yeah, I think to your point about him being rookie of the year, he better be, right, with all the billing that's come with him over the past 2 or 3 years, getting compared to, or saying he's even better of a prospect than guys like Trevor Lawrence, Andrew Luck. All of that, he better show up is, I guess, my point. But I think he has all the necessary tools in order to do so. Like, comparing the rosters between the Bears and the Vikings, for me, it's easy to pick the Bears as the better roster, right? DJ Moore, an established receiver in this league. Keenan Allen, while he's on the back end of his career, was also really, really good last year with Kellen Moore as his play caller. He was kind of spoon-fed targets, but it really worked out, and I think he really unlocks what DJ Moore and what Roma Dunze, who I believe I had as like the 6th or 7th best player on my board. He goes 9th overall. Really, really good receiver. I think they all pair well, like you said. The offensive line, I think, is average, probably, maybe a little bit better. I really like that right side with Nate Davis, Charlotte alum, and Darnell Wright, the rookie from last year. Cole Kmet is kind of underrated, I think. At least from a fantasy football perspective, I always feel he gets drafted in like round 15, and he ends up as a top 10 tight end. So maybe that's a little bit of fantasy football bias there. But they also signed DeAndre Swift like on the first 30 seconds of free agency. And then if you look at their defense, what they've done over the past really year, maybe half the year, getting Montez Sweat at the trade deadline. That was a huge boon for them. They extended him during the season. Some of their draft picks over recent years, like Gervon Dexter from Florida, I think he's done really well. Tyreek Stevenson, I don't think he plays nickel. I think he's one of their outside corners. Looked pretty good. They extended Jalen Johnson, I believe, this offseason. Jaquan Brisker and Kyler Gordon, they also drafted relatively high over the past couple of years. This is like, I don't want to say it's like the Packers because they spend a lot of first round capital on defensive draft picks, but the Bears spend a lot of second round capital on them, if you even include the Montez Sweat trade there. So I like what they're able to, or what they've done with the roster. And if you look back at post trade deadline, what the Bears defense was able to do, I believe they were first or second in scoring defense. So really stifling teams there. If Matt Eberflus could continue what he was able to do calling the defense this next season, I don't think he's the defensive play caller, but if he continues to have a big hand in that room, and the offense takes a step with Caleb Williams, this could be a dangerous team, a team that pushes for one of those wild card spots. And again, with the expectations they have, you almost kind of expect them to be, if not the 7th seed, one of the bubble teams towards the end of the year.
Yeah, and I do think like the expectations point is really interesting because the expectations for the Bears have gotten so high that like I think there needs to be like a little bit of a reminder of just like, well, I understand Caleb Williams is a really, really good quarterback prospect. The base rate for rookie quarterbacks is not CJ Stroud. Like that like doesn't happen that often. Like I still think that there will be growing pains for Caleb Williams behind this offensive line. The defense is probably a blend of what we saw in the first half and second half of the season. And so like, if a lot of those things stay on the course that we think it's going to stay, like by the end of the year, I could definitely see the Bears as a pretty good football team. I just think like that, especially for Bears fans, there shouldn't be much of a panic if the first like 6 to 8 games don't go exactly as you hope, just because there's going to be a transition period for any rookie quarterback entering the league.
I definitely think there's going to be a transition period, but what I will say that was encouraging, because I do believe Drake May was probably the best quarterback overall coming out of this class. What I think Caleb Williams added, and it's what he does so well, and he exemplified at USC, is working kind of the middle of the field and that like intermediate level. And when defenses have now been playing more cover 2 and cover 4 looks to try to take away those explosive plays, I think that's what lends kind of the modern NFL game to Caleb Williams' strengths. And I think if he can work kind of those levels, he's got so many different options. We talked about his wide receivers. We didn't even talk about his tight ends in Gerald Everett and Cole Kmet. Those guys are viable options. They have running backs that obviously they can hand the ball off to. And I just feel like Shane Waldron is going to take a lot off Caleb Williams' shoulders. We saw what he did with Russell Wilson, and then what happened with Russell Wilson when he went to Denver. We've seen how Geno has looked the past couple of years. And I think Waldron kind of getting in Caleb Williams' ear and making this offense a lot easier is something that's going to happen, and that's going to lead to good results. I think on the defensive side, if, like you said, Tej, it's kind of like a mix of the first half of how they play defense and the second half, you're probably looking at like a top 10 defense, and that's what's going to keep them in games all throughout the year. For me, they give off kind of the Packers vibes last year, where this is a team that is kind of trending in the upward direction. I think they're going to win some games that we may not expect them to win, and they're going to lose some games that they should have probably won. And that's just growing pains on a young team that's trying to figure out how to gel together and get to that next step. So for me, I don't see them losing any more than 7 games. I think the ceiling, I'm not with Adam Rank and going 12-5. I don't think the Bears are that good. But I do see them kind of winning maybe 10, maybe depending on how their schedule breaks, 11 games. But I wouldn't really bet on that or count on that. I would definitely probably look at those over numbers. I'm not exactly sure where it's set, but if it's at like 7.5, 8.5, I definitely think the over is warranted there.
You said you don't expect them to lose more than 7 games, so your expectation for them is 10-7?
Well, no. Win less than 7 games. That was
okay.
I messed up on that. That was a good catch. So yeah,
gotcha.
I do not see them going any worse than like 7-10. That's I think the worst case scenario for them.
Okay, I agree with you there. I was gonna a 10-7 floor is something else for a rookie QB, but I'm with you there. I do think there will be growing pains, especially maybe week 5 when they play the Panthers. Maybe there's going to be some growing pains there. But I do like what they're doing similarly to the Vikings. I think they've done this rebuild. It's not a retool, it's a rebuild in the right way. They've gotten O-line pieces. They have weapons for their new young QB. And even if he shows some of the flaws he showed at USC last year, I definitely think 2 years ago was the better tape. He was under duress quite a bit, some on his own volition. A lot was on the USC O-line and weapons not being up to snuff, and Lincoln Riley not making it easy mode like he usually does. But I think he is going to be an NFL QB long term, and they put all the places around him, or all the pieces around him, on offense, and they built a complementary defense full of a lot of young players. So for me, I agree. I think that 7-ish win mark is something we can expect. Maybe like a 6 to like 10-ish win outcome is kind of the range I'd give them. And yeah, I think they could sneak into one of those wild card spots, but it also wouldn't surprise me if this is more of a regular rookie QB season for them. But certainly not in the same tier as the Lions and the Packers. And I think a little bit above the Vikings, but we'll have to see.
Yeah, no, there's going to be a lot of like fighting, and I'll kind of throw up this graphic to kind of show what we mean. The market kind of projects this to be a really kind of close division, and I think when we broke these teams down, they have the talent there. The Vikings, obviously, there's expected regression with losing Kirk Cousins. The Bears, with all their draft assets and what they've been able to add on the offensive side, I think there is a little bit more bullish trends on them. And then again, the Packers and the Lions with strong finishes last year, they're going to be kind of the cream of the crop in the NFC. So we'll see how it all plays out. I will say my division rankings as it stands with predictions. I talked about this in the head coaching episode. I think Matt LaFleur and the Packers are going to go to the Super Bowl this year. I think this is that breakout year for them. I think they're going to make that push. And so I think the Packers are going to win the division, followed closely behind by the Lions, then by the Bears, and then by the Vikings. So that's how I see the NFC North shaking out. How do you guys kind of see the division falling? Do you see any surprises with maybe the Bears or Vikings even sneaking into the playoffs?
Yeah, spicy with the Packers winning the division, but I can definitely see it. Like there's an argument to be made there. With my rankings, I do have the Lions number one just because I believe in the roster. I believe in the offensive play calling. But the Packers is a very close number two there, and like we said, very similar ceiling with a little bit of a lower floor. I do have the Vikings at number three, so I'm flipped with you there as well, just because again, like I believe in the supporting cast that they have an offense. I believe in what Brian Flores is able to get out of his defense. And I still think that the consistency, the point that you brought up, Jacob, about how they consistently win 7+ games as a franchise. Like I think that they can finish around that 7-8 win mark, no matter who the starting quarterback is, just because of that. And I do have the Bears last. I think that their range of outcomes is so wide. So, it's kind of hard to pin down exactly where they're going to fall here, but it's just tough for me to see, a rookie quarterback behind a below average offensive line, having, as good of a season as some people are projecting him to. I think Caleb Williams is going to be a really, really good quarterback. It might just take him some time to get used to the NFL and the speed of the game. And so, I really could swap either of my first two and my last two, though, for sure.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Tej, on the first two. I'm just super bullish on the Lions. I think, like I'm jumping the gun here, but my take is that they're going to be the first seed in the NFC. Really like their roster and the continuity with Ben Johnson there. And they've locked up a lot of their guys with extensions. So obviously they believe as well. I think that's something maybe a little bit underrated that we have to look at there. Obviously, I have the Packers right after them. Third, I agree with Steve, though. I got the Bears in the three, and it might just be my own bias with all the expectations for the Bears. They've amassed all these assets over the past couple of years. They've gotten all these guys. They have a superstar wide receiver trio in theory, if Odunze is as good as we think he is. If Caleb Williams is the college football QB prospect messiah that he's built out to be, then the sky's the limit for her. As Michael Jordan says, the ceiling is the roof. And so that might have skewed my perception a bit, but I do think I think the median outcome for the Vikings is higher than the outcome for the Bears, just because they are a true model of consistency, especially since Kevin O'Connell took over. Just for me, maybe I'm like rooting on the Bears to fall, and that's why I have them a little bit higher, but I don't know. They talk a lot of mess with Panthers fans, so maybe I'm just being a little bit biased there. But for me, it's Lions, Packers, and then obviously a gap, and then Bears, Vikings. But this is going to be an interesting one because I think we can all agree we expect the top two teams to make the playoffs, right? And make a playoff push if everything goes right. But I think the bottom two teams are a little bit feisty. This isn't like the other divisions we've done where we did the NFC East, Eagles, Cowboys. The other two teams probably aren't going to make a huge push. We did the AFC North where all of them can make the push. And then we did the AFC East where it's a little bit iffy. It's the Bills. Are they going to regress? Can the Dolphins finally go the distance? Can Rodgers stay healthy on MetLife turf? And then I think we expect the Patriots to not do anything. So I think this division is interesting just because we have two for sure stalwart ones and then two maybe wild cards. So I'm really excited to watch the NFC North this season. There should be a lot of fun games, especially with the offensive firepower that the top two teams have and the offensive infrastructure that the bottom two teams have.
Yeah, and to be completely fair, I think the Lions have shown themselves to be kind of the class of the NFC North after last year. I think with that Jared Goff extension, even though we're throwing out 50 million plus APY on that deal over the next 2 years, which is really kind of the window I think the team is kind of working in, he's got a cap hit of 27 million this year, 30, I think it's 32 next year. And so you extend Amon-Ra, you extend lower cap hits for this next year or two push when you are really trying to be that Super Bowl contender. And we've seen teams like the Eagles and the 49ers kind of do this over the past couple of years and really keep themselves right there neck and neck. So I think the Lions have done enough to kind of replenish some of their weaknesses. I think the Packers are going to be that hot, feisty team coming off of what they did last year. And it really does come down to what you said, Jacob. Do two of these fringe teams? Are they able to compete with a team like the Seahawks, or maybe a team or two in the NFC South, depending on if the Falcons and the Saints are kind of 1-2 in that division down there, or even the Bucks kind of being sneaky from last year? And it's kind of where at that point they become in contention for that hunt and not so much playoff locks. And so with that, I think we're pretty much wrapped up with the NFC North. We have alluded to some of our takes, but I'll just reiterate that for the sake of our podcast listeners. For me, the perfect take is I think Caleb Williams is the offensive rookie of the year. I think he hits the ground running. It may not be week 1, but I think it's going to be early enough on the season where he's going to have that kind of CJ Stroud rookie season where he shows the flashes of why he was the number 1 overall pick. And I think that is due in large part to the scheme and the system that's around him. We saw what Bobby Slowick and Nico Collins and those max protection looks did for CJ Stroud and his abilities. I think Caleb Williams is going to get a lot of that this year. Shane Waldron is known for using 12 personnel. We talked about their tight ends earlier. I think he's going to do what he can to make sure that Caleb Williams is staying upright and doing what he does best.
Yeah, I'm not as high on Shane Waldron as you are. I think we've gone back and forth on that over the years. And I really like Marvin Harrison Jr. down in Arizona. And while QBs do get the bump for the awards like we saw last year, both Stroud and Puka Nacua had phenomenal seasons, but Puka was an all-pro. So I thought he maybe could have gotten the nod there, but we'll have to see. I alluded to mine as well. I think the Lions will get that number 1 seed. I think we're going to see continued sustained success on that offense. And if, just like you said, Tej, if a number of those corners that they threw all those darts at, if we can just get 2 competent corners out of that, the defense is going to be really, really good. So I'm feeling really strong about the Lions. And I think your take is definitely the most interesting out of all of them, just looking at the notes here.
Well, I mean, I am hoping that yours happens the most, Jacob. Just to get the number 1 seed, that would be nice to have home field advantage throughout the playoffs. But yeah, my perfect take about the NFC North is I think Sam Darnold plays 10 plus games for the Vikings, and I think he finishes better than 18th in EPA per play or yards per attempt, whatever metric you want to use. I think that, again, you look at Sam Darnold. I remember the game 2 years ago, right before Christmas, where the Panthers smoked the Lions as they were trying to make a playoff push. And you guys did run all over us in that game, but also like Sam Darnold played well. Like he played well down the stretch, after the coaching change. Last year in limited time in San Francisco, he also played well. Like I think about him coming in garbage time against the Ravens and making some really good throws in that game. He's someone who's ranked 11th in EPA per play these past 2 seasons on a limited sample size. And he gets to throw to Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson when he comes back from injury, Aaron Jones out of the backfield. Just like so many weapons there available to him. So I think that he's gonna start a decent amount of games this year and probably tail off eventually, where they'll end up putting in JJ McCarthy. But I think that the path to him playing a lot and the efficiency is definitely there in Minnesota.
That 18 number is really interesting. Vikings were exactly 18th in EPA per play last season. So if he can keep up the status quo or do a little bit better than Josh Dobbs, and I don't even remember who else they played down the stretch, I think yours has a really good chance of happening.
What I like about that too is Kevin O'Connell comes from the Sean McVay of kind of thinking Shanahan tree, that kind of play calling and style. And we see so much of how that success is predicated on some of those first read percentages. And so for me, when I've always watched Sam Darnold, it's not that he can't make certain throws. He can make every single throw on the field. He just almost gets this like tunnel vision focus, and you'll have these zone safeties or corners kind of come off where they're supposed to and make a play on the ball. It was a training camp video, I think this past week, that he tried to fit a ball in a window that really wasn't there. And so I think that's the only big concern with Darnold going of that. Can he not just lock in somebody and go through his reads and find that open guy? Because Kevin O'Connell's going to have it schemed up greatly. Like you have both alluded to, phenomenal playmakers on the outside. This is arguably like a top 5, maybe even top 3 skill position group to be throwing to. And it's headed up by arguably the best wide receiver in the NFL. So I think that does it for us. Thank you so much, Tej, for coming on. You're going to be a future, I would say the future Lions general manager one day, and hopefully lead them to another title or 2 if they don't win one here in the next couple of years. Next week, we break down the AFC West. So we're heading to the West Coast. We'll be hosting Robbie as our guest. He's a Broncos fan, and we'll be diving in with that. Any last thoughts before we hop off?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you guys having me on. Always love coming on the show. Think you guys both are doing super great work. Jacob, between what you do with draft stuff, which I'll be hitting you up, as we get closer to that season, and Steve, like obviously everything you do from a public perspective with your articles and your data viz is amazing. So, it's always great to come on and talk to you guys.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Well, until next week. Oh, Jacob.
I was just saying thanks for the kind words. We loved having you on as well.
Absolutely. I don't think we play the Lions this year unless we make the playoffs and you beat us as the number 1 seed. So fingers crossed on that. I think that would be the best of both worlds. But until then, until next week, we will catch you guys.